Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Stuart Grant. I'm a consultant with Hydrock, and I'm really looking forward to hosting this event today, this webinar today, which is actually the 12th in the Hydrock Lockdown webinar series. Today, we're focusing on energy storage and particularly battery storage and the opportunities that it offers to improve development site viability, as well as increase resilience within the overall power network. We're aiming at 45 minutes of presentations and Q&A to give some context and clarity to what this market is all about and to how potentially you can all get involved. It's a big, wide-ranging subject, and we've got a lot to pack in. So if we overrun by 5 minutes, please forgive me, but we'll try and stick to 45-50 minutes. For those of you who don't know us, Hydrock is a UK-wide consultancy in the built environment sector. We specialise in energy, sustainability and multidisciplinary engineering design. And our 16 offices have expanded to 500 plus during lockdown. Like a number of our teams, the smart energy and sustainability team has witnessed significant growth in the last year, fueled by the industry's appetite to move towards a smarter energy infrastructure with increased efficiency, reduced costs, and a cleaner, greener future for our power. Please post any questions or observations in the question box in front of you on your screen, and we'll try and pick up as many of these as we can later in the session. Please let us know your name and your organisation, and we're really interested in your views, so please don't be shy. We're delighted to have a panel with us today with a wide range of interests and opinions, so we're looking forward to a sort of highly charged and energetic discussion. They'll briefly introduce themselves in a little while, but just to mention, they are Dr. Amanda Hughes, University of Liverpool, Aidan Connolly of ENGIE, Shay Tierney of Harworth Group, Stephen Snowden of Peel Energy, and our very own David Strether. Within Hydrock, he's known as Battery Dave. So firstly, I'm actually going to hand you over to Dave to introduce himself and to give us a short presentation on what this phenomenon is all about and to give some context for our discussion. Dave's promised me that he's going to demystify the whole subject within 10 minutes. So good morning, Dave. Are you ready to kick us off with the battery show?
Morning, Stuart, and thanks for a fantastic introduction. My name's Dave Strether and I'm Technical Director at Hydrock. I'm working in the Smart Energy and Sustainability team. I'm a design engineer by trade, and I started my life in the battery industry in 1982, so I'll let you do the maths on that one. Obviously time is short, so we'll try and leap straight into a standalone battery storage site, which we have here. It's a good sort of representation to show you some of the key points and some of the key parts of a battery storage site. This is a compound we're working on and is a 5 megawatt battery with a 4-hour standby, so 20 megawatt hours. Probably end up being a 15 megawatt hour site as it's a lot more economic with a shorter duration battery. The drawing is not to scale, but you can see there we've got 4 by 40 foot shipping containers, which they include the batteries. There's air conditioning within each container, a fire security system, battery monitoring and controls. Then there's 2 by 20 foot containers, which are generally the power control systems and the inverters. On the site, we would normally have to include the substation for the DNO for the on-site connection. Then we've got a medium voltage skid with a transformer and some other ancillary kit. The typical layout here is about 30 by 30 meters. We would normally contract to a 1 acre site as a minimum, but we could cram quite a lot more into the site, and stacking containers is possible. I could go into a lot more detail, but I won't, but I'll just go into a little bit more about battery storage. If we go back, say, 10 years, when there was little or no renewables on the grid, the safety blanket, we called it the spinning reserve. This came from predominantly diesel generators, and they were a perfectly adequate way of balancing the grid for many, many decades, because response time was not an issue, but today it clearly is. Today, our energy is made up of 50% renewables, and National Grid ESO plans want to be able to run from 100% renewables by 2025. So therefore, we have a lot more volatility on the grid and intermittent generation. There's been a number of reports expressing concerns with renewable energy on the grid because it creates a lot of volatility. Well, batteries actually like volatility. Batteries are the most flexible asset on the distribution system and can react quicker than any other technology. Just some notes there about global prediction for the addition of storage. They're huge. It's a very, very big number, 1 terawatt. This actually covers all forms of storage, from batteries, as we have here, to flow batteries, compressed air, pumped hydro, and some more experimental storage options that are not yet fully commercial. The UK itself, that's going to require 30 gigawatts by 2050. A simple visualization really is that we would need 6,000 of these compounds to meet our net zero obligations. Of course, we're not going to drop 5 megawatt battery sites all over the country. It's going to be a mixture of capacities from sort of 1 megawatt to 100 megawatts. If we go to the next slide, please. This shows some of the opportunities battery storage can provide, not in any order of preference or priority, but probably the 5 key areas batteries are starting to prove their worth. First one, revenue. Once a battery is connected to the grid, we can start to get a number of different revenue options. They're available from daily trading, there's demand side response, capacity market, dynamic containment, and quite a number of other options. Plus, National Grid services are coming online from Black Start, and a number of other papers are being written about further uses of battery assets. The cost savings, we can obviously manage peak load, we can manage peak demand, we can load shift, and there's obviously business continuity. Decarbonisation, in simple terms, will be a positive result of greater efficiency in the energy sector. For example, wind turbines won't need to be curtailed or actually switched off, and solar energy can be stored and used when it's needed. The capacity is a bit more related to the type of energy network we have and the need for capacity, with increased EV demand, electrification of the heating network, and a general increase in demand. Large central plant and distributed generation working together is going to be the solution, and not one or the other. Resilience of the grid, again, is going to be key to a workable energy strategy. And taking all of the above into account, batteries and storage really need to be the glue to hold all these technologies together, and it has to be the logical way forward. Just a quick comment on hydrogen. Obviously, we can't ignore hydrogen, and it's a subject in itself. It's going to be hugely important for the future energy landscape, but in my opinion, one size does not fit all, and the whole hydrogen network is going to have to fit in with other technologies in the short and medium term. The whole energy network will be so different by 2050, and hydrogen is going to be integral to it. But I think we're going to have a mix of technologies. Next slide, please, Harry. This is really just highlighting some of the key points. I'll whiz through this as time is short. Battery storage can generate revenue. It can obviously co-locate with other assets. The grid balancing opportunities it presents, and sustainability. Next slide, please, Harry. Again, there's some further additional benefits for battery storage as an asset. Each of these areas are pretty much a specific subject and business opportunity in its own right. Hence why I've shown them as a pretty high level, and some of the case studies I'm going to whiz through will highlight a little bit more of how we can unlock the opportunities. Next slide, please. Again, just a little bit about our team and what we do at Hydrock and the Smart Energy and Sustainability team. This really shows that although storage is a complex area, with the right skills, projects can be unlocked. At the moment, we're working on 150 megawatts of battery sites in our portfolio, all at various stages, and we're developing 15 client battery projects, and they total around 50 megawatts. All of those are heading for a position to be built in 2021. And the next one, please. This is the first of the case studies. It's demonstrating a bit about the revenue that can be earned from a battery. It's not that actual site, because the site is a disused quarry in Scotland. It's a 20 megawatt battery that's going to be built in Q1 of 2021. It's a standalone battery, grid connected. It's not typical site, as it's in a really high area of volatility with a huge amount of wind turbines. The location is pretty much on a pinch point from where the turbines hit the Hunterston link, and volatility is very high, so the batteries like that, and hence why the revenues are quite healthy on that one. The lithium part of the battery is going to be replaced around year 12. The other hardware won't need to be changed because it's going to exceed the life of the project quite easily. The lithium that's removed is going to be either recycled or go to a second use. We and our suppliers, we would say the end of life on a battery is when it reaches 70% capacity. Next slide, please. This is a small site where we built. It's not that actual picture there because it's only a 5 megawatt site. It's a site with multiple occupancy, a mixture of business and residential. The land's not suitable for either of those, so we engaged pretty early with the local council and the planners. We discussed our solution, and they were fully supportive of the project. It's not huge, but it actually does generate quite good returns. And we have a 10% plus internal rate return, unlocking a redundant piece of land. Next one, please. We've been contracted by a port to look at their entire energy strategy with its obviously carbon footprint as its main driver. I believe it's probably the true driver is economics, but nevertheless it's a great project and a very proactive client. The challenge is not really its current energy picture, as they use a lot of oil and diesel, so that is a challenge, but how are we going to manage and store the 60,000 electric vehicles that are going to be on site? Where are we going to get all the extra generation from? And clearly, how are we going to meet the targets to comply with any climate demands? They've currently got 2 wind turbines on site with about 4 megawatts capacity. Our solution has been to design a mixture of ground mount solar, solar carports, battery storage, smart chargers, and a further wind turbine. It's a mixture of all these technologies working together with batteries at the core. The result means that we can modernise the facility, obviously meet its future demands, and reduce any environmental impact. The hope is obviously that the client will implement all of the changes, and Hydrock will be used to do that. I appreciate it's been a really brief intro. I've tried to cover as many things as I can and cram in a very short time. It gives you a flavour of how batteries are being deployed and how some of the projects are starting to happen. It's been a long time in the making, and as a non-subsidy driven solution, it is commercially viable. Over to you, Stuart, for the panel for some discussion. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you very much for sticking to that brief and for giving us a really good overview. It's a hugely complex subject, and I did do the maths, Dave, but I won't embarrass you with the stats on that. But it's good to see that your battery is still fully charged. Let me tell you that. Now, if I can ask the panel to briefly introduce themselves, that would be helpful, and then we'll get stuck into some Q&A. So, Stephen, can I come to you first, please?
Good morning, everybody. My name's Steve Snowden. I'm a planning manager at Peel Energy, although from next week we're going to be called Peel Natural Resources and Energy, just reflecting our expanded brief. I've been both the public sector and private sector planner for, oh gosh, over 20 years now. So I guess I've seen sort of energy infrastructure from both sides of the table. Prior to joining Peel Energy, I was building sheds and beds, so logistics centres, houses and the like. But I decided that renewable energy offered a bit more of a challenge, and that's certainly right. So I've been pushed from the Shetlands all the way down to Sheerness, developing wind farms and solar farms, looking at flexible energy solutions. So initially that was sort of gas engines, looking at batteries as well, and each of them are sort of dragging with them their own particular challenges. So that's good for me as a professional. It keeps you on your toes, and I think I'll be staying in the sector for quite some time yet, as I don't see the need for renewable energy and its integration disappearing anytime soon. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you, Stephen. Can I come on to Amanda, please? Hi, Amanda.
Hi, good morning. Yeah, so my name is Dr. Amanda Hughes. I'm a lecturer at the University of Liverpool, and my research interests are in solar energy. So I spend a lot of my time in the lab looking at different materials and manufacturing methods, trying to make solar cells more efficient and lower in cost. But I do also work on system level design of off-grid solar energy systems for remote communities, which means that I occasionally get to leave the lab and go to some really beautiful locations. In the past, I've run a pilot trial of solar powered desalination for communities in India affected by drought. And at the moment, I'm working with a cooperative of farmers in Tanzania, looking at solar powered refrigeration to reduce post-harvest food loss. So I certainly wouldn't claim to be a battery expert, certainly not in this crowd, but I do appreciate the need for battery storage when it comes to renewables.
Thank you, Amanda. And then if we could move on to Shay, please. Shay Tierney. Morning, Shay.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Shay Tierney, Electrical Infrastructure Manager at Harworth Group plc. We are a leading land and property regeneration company based in the North East and the Midlands. We own and manage about 18,000 acres of land across 100 sites. We evolved through what was previously the property arm of the UK Coal, transforming the coal mining sites into business parks and housing developments. I've been an electrical engineer for just coming up to 40 years, 30 of which were the former UK Coal sites, managing the requirements of the high voltage electrical infrastructure and assets across the surface of the mines. And the rest of the time I've had with Harworth, contributing to the energy strategy, managing all the electrical infrastructure requirements, whether that be maintenance, new connections, capacity planning, or managing new installations across the piece. We've currently about 150 megawatts of generation across our sites, which is primarily wind, solar and coal mine methane extraction. As well as the major developments sites, we have a recurring income portfolio of business parks. It's 2.9 million square feet across 22 sites and 154 tenants.
Thank you, Shay. 40 years, that trumps even Dave. That's impressive. And last but not least, can Aidan introduce himself? And Aidan, I can't remember. Did we say that we were going to mention the rugby at the weekend or not? I can't remember.
Take myself off mute, but maybe I should say I'm mute for that. No, we definitely said we wouldn't mention the rugby, but listen, hope springs eternal. Hope springs eternal. We got to let you have a few wins to give you a full sense of security. Yeah. So I'll keep it short and sweet. I'm Aidan Connolly. I work at NG UK. Unlike Shay and Dave, I haven't been in the industry for 40 years. Bit more of a spring chicken. But NG UK is quite a big organisation that does multiple things within the energy sector in the UK. I look after its battery storage division. So in essence, what we do is invest and install currently behind the meter battery solutions, but we're now investing in installing utility scale, so essentially larger front of meter solutions. And we're also developing an optimization service, basically a route to market to bring value to these larger solutions. Very good presentation, Dave. I thought it's, clicked on a lot of the things that someone who is trying to look at investing in storage thinks about. So yeah, really looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Aidan, and we'll be back to you all soon. So just moving into a few Q&A, and I suppose starting with the macro picture really, and I'm going to focus on Stephen here, planner at heart. We obviously know that the energy industry is going through this massive transformation from fossil fuel dependency to the sort of multifaceted renewables market. But what for Peel is the key challenge in harnessing energy from all those sort of disparate renewable sources to help balance demand with a reliable supply? And is energy storage the catalyst to help join the dots?
A good question. I mean, I think David's done a good job of showing just how valuable energy storage can be in the form of batteries, although he did allude to various other methods that are out there, some of which I think are a little more at the research and development stage than perhaps others. So it's clearly going to be playing a role. I've just read a report by Aurora Energy Research that says it's going to cost around £6 billion to put the necessary amount of storage required to meet the sort of UK government's desire to have a decarbonised grid by 2050, which is quite a big number. Although, given the numbers that Rishi Sunak's been bouncing around quite lately, it's probably quite trifling in the larger scheme of things. But nevertheless, for us, obviously one of the issues involved in integrating renewables and meeting demand is the fact that well, the government keeps putting up obstacles to developing more renewables. Very often we're still waiting for a cohesive strategy. I'm sure it's just over the hill. That'll be coming to us shortly. The grid, I think, is doing its level best to try and keep up, but there's still more work to be done there. Grid connectivity is absolutely key. Lots of developers are chasing grid capacity. We're now looking at developing our own microgrids on some of our projects. We see that as a way, I think, of having a smarter integrated product for a number of our tenants. We're doing that at our Protos scheme just near Ellesmere Port. Energy innovation and industry all coming together. We have a wind farm there. We're planning solar. We've got British Geological Society looking at geothermal energy. We've got huge energy consumers around us. So that's a good idea there. David alluded to the complexity and the various ways that you can actually build a revenue stack, which can be quite daunting if you're looking to sort of break into this particular business sector, working out how you're going to make the money. Is that actually going to stay stable enough for you to build a business model on it, given the interventionist nature of government, who like to chop and change, sorting out insurance products for batteries? They're quite an old technology, but as they scale up, they will need particular types of cover. You know, we've all seen sort of horrendous pictures on YouTube of unfortunate events, and then, you know, they're portrayed as the norm. They're absolutely not. I'd hasten to say it's a well understood technology. And then the general mismatch, as it were, that I see anyway, between the amount of renewables we want to bring on stream, the way that we're getting in, you know, our ability to harness and integrate that power, and the lack of a sensible sort of regulatory framework for it at the moment. I think there's a bit of government catch-up needed on that. We don't have a national policy statement for batteries, and yet they've been around for a long time. They are a significant part of the solution to decarbonisation. There's no strategic level guidance from government on it. I think that's something that they should be jolly well attending to try and prevent any swearing at this point in the proceedings.
You promised me that you would, so thank you for that, Steve. And I'm going to try, and I'll come back to you, but I'm going to try and move on because we've got so many topics that we want to cover, and I just want to pick up for a moment on some sort of R&D work. And Amanda, I was really interested to hear that reference to the work that you're doing in Tanzania. I think it's with the farming community. I'm interested to know what do you think we can learn from developing nations such as this in the way they use energy storage? Obviously their needs are possibly different to ours, but have they got storage accepted, and do they see the value? What what can we take from that experience?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and it is such a vastly different application in that, you know, most of the communities I've worked with, there is no grid, and they so you tend to be working with individual businesses or small communities, and it's definitely more in the micro generation side of things. So their energy storage needs are several orders of magnitude lower than David was discussing earlier, and it is. You know, it is the case that you will see some of these systems out in developing nations, but as far as the battery storage goes, there's definitely a strong leaning toward lead acid batteries. And I think that, you know, as David said earlier, that Hydrock are already demonstrating that battery storage in the UK is commercially viable without subsidies. I think that's not necessarily the case for these communities often, and whilst the technology would have the potential to vastly transform businesses and livelihoods, one of the greatest barriers to overcome are the economic challenges, and it's just the costs of these systems. So one of the things I'm looking at the moment is doing a techno-economic analysis for the Ministry of Agriculture in Tanzania, looking at different subsidies and how we may make this technology more accessible. But it might be worth mentioning one of the ways in which a business model that I have seen quite successfully implemented in these kinds of communities is to rethink the business model really, and to consider it more as rather than selling a product, more of providing a service. So I've seen some really interesting businesses in communities in India where they are offering a service whereby farmers can rent energy storage systems and cold storage for their produce. So they have these solar powered refrigerated trucks with battery incorporated into them, and they use an app function, and farmers can book to use the service in a way to increase their profits, and it's working quite successfully. So I think really if the technology is going to launch in emerging economies, there needs to be a rethink of the business model and the strategies for doing that.
Thank you. That's really interesting. We can obviously all learn from each other. Just sticking on the sort of the R&D theme, Aidan, if you're still talking to me, NG are involved with Keele University. You're involved in the energy centre there, where I think you're looking to sort of utilise a mix of renewable and battery solutions to power the campus for, is it 25 years? Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing there and what lessons you're taking from that back into your mainstream projects?
Yeah, sure. And just actually touching on what Amanda just said, the as a service model, that fits exactly with what we're doing. That's a really good point. And it's not always just selling something or investing in something directly. Essentially what we've done is we've just signed a project with Keele University, which is essentially an as-a-service project whereby we're installing quite a considerable amount of renewable capacity and storage capacity. So it's 5.5 megawatts of solar, 1.8 megawatts of wind, and we have a 2 megawatt hour battery there. So all that will feed the university's consumption. So it's what you term a behind the meter solution. Which, you know, if you look at other storage sites, the larger ones are usually front of meter and dealing with things on the grid. This is behind the meter, so helping a final consumption site manage its own demand and helping use that solar capacity to the best ability and use it all on site. But essentially, it's an as-a-service product. You know, we're leasing those renewable assets to the university. So I think Amanda's point is really, you know, quite smart. It doesn't have to be just an investment, a big upfront capex investment on the behalf of customers. There is service models that can make this work as well.
Thanks, Aidan. Shay, I'm going to come to you now, because obviously you, apart from the huge amount of development activity that Harworth are involved in, you mentioned that as a business you own and manage a significant amount of business park stock. And I'm sort of interested to know, how are you looking at battery storage as a means of contributing to your longer term estate management strategy?
Yes, we will do as time goes on. I mean, one of the major things that it can do, it can reduce the costs for the tenants. So we might have a site where it's perhaps got a connection of say 4 MVA, but a majority of the time we're probably nowhere near that in using it. So we could lower that import supply capacity, and then the idea would be that you can put batteries on the site to cover the peak demand at times. So that would be one of the options that we can use it for. Another part of the energy strategy which we're thinking of is a lot of companies will need a firm supply, i.e. they're going to need a backup. It's critical plant. So sooner than it could massively reduce costs again, because you could just bring in the one supply and then have your batteries sat there to give the other supply. In the case of maintenance or if they're not going to be using that type of thing, we're going to be using it obviously to meet our zero carbon target. So we'll look into it for that. But the big point about the battery storage is it tends to need a lot of import. It is normally that on these systems you can need as much import as the batteries will give you to export. So I think it does have to be used in conjunction with other renewable sources charging the batteries. So you can put wind turbines on, solar farms, and then it's not costing you anything. You're not taking it off the grid, and you're meeting your zero carbon targets. Particularly if you were going to use them sort of systems to put battery charging stations for car battery charging stations. So it's those sort of ideas that we're looking at.
Good, thank you. I'm going to move back to Dave, and Dave, I'm interested to know from your perspective, because you're involved across the board with so many different parties. I'm interested to know what the investor appetite is for this sort of emerging market, and how institutional and pension fund providers are sort of looking at the market at the moment, and a sort of sense of public-private sector collaboration and partnership. Any thoughts on that, Dave?
It's been obviously when the whole industry started out, it was pretty high risk investment, but with a lot more track record and history of how batteries can be traded, and a lot more experience in the various revenue streams and longer term revenue streams, there is a little bit more money being available, and it's still considered risks with not being able to have the visibility of say 25-year revenues, but you can get a 15-year contract with the capacity market. Certain aggregators are offering guarantees, and we can start to see there is money coming in. I think funds you mentioned, sort of institutional funds like pension funds, they're dipping a toe in the water. They're getting involved. I think Gore Street Capital have just paid 35 million for 85 megawatts of PAR developed projects from UNESCO. Gresham House are really throwing a lot of investment into their portfolio. EDF are sitting and managing around 250 megawatts of storage capacity. So it's moving, but like both Aidan and Amanda alluded to, it's a mixture of not just solid investment, just put some money into storage and get some money out. We're looking at the additional functionality it can bring, continuity of supply, and unlocking land that's not sort of able to be used, and sort of meantime potential. So there's a number of variations, and I'd say, try to answer your question quickly, funds are starting to come into this area, and co-locating with a more known renewables is going to be will add a lot of value to the investment. So it will continue to happen.
Thanks, Dave. Stephen, I'm going to come back to you. I'm sure you might even have a comment on that yourself, but I suppose getting to the crux of the issue or the sort of synopsis for this morning, I'm interested in, whilst technology for this sort of battery installation is large-scale battery installation is relatively new, how do you as a developer or as an investor with numerous property deals actually find your way into this market in the first place? What are your first stepping stones in terms of getting involved and looking at the viability of sites?
Yeah, it's a complex one, and I mean we're a bit like Harworth, for example. We're spread over a number of sort of business sectors. You know, we've got ports, we've got airports, we've got retail parks, we've got industrial parks, we've got renewable energy generating assets ourselves, and across all of them you can see a different role for batteries, for example, and as well as new schemes that we're promoting. You need to really understand what it is that your users or your tenants or your prospective tenants actually want and how they operate, and that can involve sort of a deep dive into their half-hourly billing for a year or more, so you can genuinely see what their usage profile is like. We've done that with our airports at Liverpool, John Lennon, and Doncaster, Sheffield. So you can there, for example, we've fine-tuned a solar array for each of those. We're looking at battery storage on them because obviously airports like continued supplies of electricity to their infrastructure. Nobody wants to be hearing from the controller that the scopes have gone dark or the runway lights have gone out. So the batteries there can provide, in effect, an uninterruptible power supply element that can allow them to continue critical operations. We're looking at it, for example, on new uses that are coming forward, highly energy intensive uses. You may have seen some stuff about cultivation of cannabis for medicinal and pharmaceutical purposes. Indoor cultivation is massively energy intensive, but also it's highly critical. If those atmospheric controls and conditions aren't maintained for just 2 or 3 hours in the same way, the plant will alter its growth cycle and it can knacker you in a non-technical sense. And so you need to make certain, there is a case for, ideally that's an industry that would like to be powered by renewable power, a lot of it, but it needs to be absolutely smooth and consistent power. And that's where your battery can come in there as well. So you need to look at what linkages already are there, what the business user wants, because more and more businesses want to be green and be powered by green. I don't see many putting their hands up saying, we want to be powered by coal, hang this green malarkey. So I think you've got to be able to demonstrate the value and how it slots into their modus operandi, as it were. Understand that, understand the scale of your challenge, and then you can look at things like, as was alluded to earlier in the presentation, are there any bits of land or any parts of that development site that really aren't good for your primary purposes, but basically an autonomous battery installation would work on quite well, thank you very much. So you do need to try and integrate all of those, but the best is understand who you're dealing with or whom you want to be dealing with. Sorry, a bit of a long-winded answer there, but
no, it made sense. Thanks for that. I'm going to move on. I was going to take other opinions on that, but I'm mindful of time. I actually just want to talk about public perception for a moment. Fracking became an emotional subject. I think, if we're being honest, the general are probably generally distrustful of some energy providers due to some dodgy practice. And both of these things have probably tarnished the energy sector's reputation to some extent. Many will be suspicious of the concept of container-sized batteries in storage compounds. I'm just interested, I'm probably going to come to you, Amanda, give you a bit of notice on this. What's needed to help people understand what this is all about and the range of technologies and the potential that it has?
Yes, I think it's a really good question, and I think that we have to acknowledge that there are going to be concerns, and we can expect that those concerns will grow as these things come nearer to fruition. And I think that, also you have to understand that from the public's point of view, these concerns are valid. Stephen mentioned earlier about these videos that they've seen online of catastrophic events with batteries, and we all know about the spread of misinformation online as well. We saw what happened with 5G, and I think it's easy, when you have a scientific background, to find these things funny because it just seems so absurd, and so we as the experts tend to laugh it off. But often the problem is that those who are spreading misinformation are as confident as they are misinformed, and they shout louder than us, and that's why these things can gain traction. And so I think that really the onus is on all of us as the experts in the community to speak up and add our voices to that conversation, because it's up to us, we're the experts, we need to alleviate those concerns. Who else is going to do it? And I think that this is something that I'm really passionate about, and I love trying to communicate science to a general audience. Unlike most of my colleagues, I find that a fun challenge, and I often write articles for news outlets. So just this morning I had a news article published in The Independent, and it's on ESA's plans for solar power stations in space. That is a shameless plug, go check it out. But you know, I would be I think it would be a great outcome of today's event if perhaps we could get together and come up with a news article pitch that I could put to my journalist contacts, because I really think it is up to us to contribute to that narrative.
That's a great idea. I think we'll do that. That's a smashing idea. I'm actually going to ditch the rest of my 37 questions that I've got, because I'm going to go to questions from our guests, and we've got a few here. I'm going to start with Andy Bailey of Pooldick. Good morning, Andy. Following government's announcements that they're looking to ban new petrol diesel cars from 2030, will the infrastructure to support this be ready? If not, what needs to be done? Who would like to answer that question? Dave.
Yeah, I thought you might suggest. Well, clearly we've got a lot of infrastructure to get in place for EV charging, but and there seems to be an investment appetite now. You can't always relate it back to storage, but there are a number of businesses out there looking to put storage in to sort of back up the grid for the extra demand. But the key is going to be to coming up, as Stephen mentioned earlier, we need to see some clarity and strategy, and what are we looking to as our base charging point? Is it going to be vehicle at home charging, or are we going to ask people to be charging their vehicles at work? Are we going to be putting in charging plans to say you can't charge your vehicle at a peak time, but you'll have a certain time slot when you charge your vehicle? I think, as one of my colleagues quite clearly pointed out, we're going to need around 250,000 rapid chargers by 2030. So quite a bit of infrastructure to put in there. I think the appetite is there. People are keen to get electrification in place, but there's quite a bit of investment required. And get to open it up to some of the other panelists, I think we need some clarity and strategy before we know where we're heading for the larger scale. Yeah. And we've got quite a few million cars to worry about.
Yeah. Anybody got any other opinions to add on that? Anybody from the panel? Aidan, bring you in.
I think that's exactly as Dave said. It's a massive challenge because I don't know where the DNOs are going to get the capacity for all these charge points. But another thing that's been highlighted recently is that it is a massive challenge, but a huge opportunity that in effect competes with battery storage. We saw the future energy scenarios from National Grid come out recently that basically said by 2050 we should have 250 gigawatt hours of storage in cars, which is basically through V2G. So that's a massive amount of storage compared to, you know, the containerized grid-facing battery storage that we're talking about here. That's going to be playing on the same markets. That's going to be undermining in some ways the business case for large-scale storage. So in some ways it's a challenge to get it done, but it's a huge opportunity for balancing the grid as well. Thank you, Aidan.
I'm just going to pick up another question here. In fact, I'm going to pick up, good morning, Ian Kirkham. Ian of PK Marine, good morning. Ian, how are you? With the limited life, 12 years of lithium batteries, will the installations not become obsolete with the rapid development of battery technology, e.g. graphene and silicon? Now, Dave, you talked to me about graphene before, and one of the questions I had for you is, how long before I'm able to hold a 50 megawatt battery in my hand?
Not long, Stuart, I'm guessing. Be a mixture of. As I mentioned in the we look at 25-year life of a project where we replace the lithium 12 years as a project. That's just the lithium portion of it. Technologies are improving, and lithium ion, which we focus on, is quite a proven tech. But if we go back even 50 years, lead acid batteries have been in play for well, since 100 years even. But Amanda mentioned it's still a preferred technology in parts of Africa, and technology is a little easy to operate. Lithium is going to be here for a long time, but I've worked on programs for many different chemistries, and graphene is one where I see a mixture of lithium and graphene as a solution will be probably one of the more an early adopter in advancement, and that will probably be coming in the next probably 20 years. But there's a long way forward yet with lithium ion and the market that's going to be there for lithium ion. So it's going to be a mix of technologies. I don't see, again, you can't have a lithium ion battery and a graphene battery and an ultra capacitor doing all of the functionality that we're going to require. We might need 1 or 2 minute discharges for batteries, and some of the grid balancing will be 30 seconds, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. But then we might need longer term storage solutions and battery solutions for EV charging, 2 hours, 3 hours. So it's a mixture of technologies from my perspective still. And there is no one solution that's going to solve every one of the energy challenges we have. But you won't be holding a 50 megawatt battery in your hand for a while, I would say, Stuart. But
right. Okay.
Certainly sizes will be coming down, and efficiencies are increasing, and new technologies are coming on board.
Thank you, Dave. Mindful of the time, I just want to probably pick up. Thank you very much to Stephen Snowden, who's been doing a superb job of moderating and responding to a lot of questions that have been coming in. Stephen, thank you very much for that. Really appreciate it. Just, I suppose, my final question for a couple of contributions from whoever is just sort of cast your mind 10 years ahead, 2030. We're all in electric vehicles, charging infrastructure is sorted. What do you think the future energy landscape will look like in 2030 when we've hopefully saved the planet? Shay, I'm going to come to you because any thoughts on that?
Yes, I think that the country will be covered in wind turbines. I think we'll have solar everywhere, absolutely everywhere. And I think that wherever there's rivers, there'll be hydro.
Yes.
Because I mean, obviously the large coal-fired power stations are now gone, or going if they're not already gone. So what is going to replace them? I think it's got to be local generation all over the country. I don't think there's any other solution. So it's going to be a combination of all the things just mentioned.
Thank you. Thank you. Stephen?
Yeah, I wish I shared Shay's faith that there would be turbines all over the country. Bojo's made it absolutely clear that the true blue Tories in the Shires would, rather die than see that. Hence, everything's going to be shuffled offshore, irrespective of the cost implications of that. So I think you may see a bit more solar. In fact, well, you're going to have to see a bit more solar. But for the time being, unfortunately, I don't see any relaxing of the innate hostility towards onshore wind, despite the fact that it's coming along in leaps and bounds. I think Scotland and Wales are going to leave England in their dust when it comes to the deployment of that particular technology. I'd love to think it was all nationally and spatially planned. I'm seeing precious little evidence of that yet. Perhaps if we can drag some of the Whitehall weenies out from their ivory towers and get up to the desolate north, they might start to see a little bit more of the real world. I know that might be an anathema to them, but it has to happen at some point. So I think that will be interesting. I don't see any incentivization coming anytime soon. That's still a dirty word in government circles, unless of course it was fracking, in which case you can have whatever you want. But that didn't work too well. So I think, yeah, there are still going to be challenges. I think we're still going to have to push hard to get the energy infrastructure we need. Not so much alongside a strategy, but perhaps in the absence of one, certainly for the first few years anyway. Just my tuppence worth anyway. So sorry for sounding pessimistic, but when you're in there, sort of, eventually, you have to tell somebody something.
Yeah. They're not going to grind you down there, Stephen. I can see that for sure. I think unless anybody else has got any final observations to make, I'm probably going to draw it to to a conclusion there. We've still got well over 100 attendees on the call, so I think that tells us that there's been some interesting, well-received conversations. I just want to thank all the panelists today. I want to say thanks to Amanda, to Shay, to Aidan, to Stephen, and of course to Battery Dave. Thanks for the presentation, Dave. Really useful overview, and thanks to everybody for the contributions. I hope everybody on the call has enjoyed the session and we've got something out of it. Sorry if we're not being able to deal with all the questions coming in the panel, and we'll take a look at that, and if we can, we'll come back to you on any subjects that haven't been raised or picked on. If you're interested to look back at any of our earlier webinars, you'll find a range of smart energy, fire and other subjects on hydrock.com/webinars. Worth a look. And if you've any thoughts in terms of webinar topics that you'd like to be covered in the future, please you could drop a line to events@hydrock.com, and one of our amazing marketing team will get back to you. So thanks again for your company this morning. Enjoy the rest of your day. It's strange to think that it's actually only 4 weeks today to Christmas Eve. And whilst we're all living through challenging times currently, let's all remember and let's all look out for each other in the weeks and months ahead, as we find our way towards the light at the end of the tunnel, because hopefully that'll have been powered by a Hydrock battery. Thanks very much. Have a good day. See you soon. Bye now.